Space, the final frontier. Space Station Ashland sits on the edge of Federation space with its companion ship, the USS Dalamis Christian. The space around them is full of mystery and strange wonders, where secrets are kept and danger lurks around every corner. The crew of the Dalamis Christian must navigate treacherous waters as they work to protect the Federation. But as they peer into the unknown, they will discover that the line between friend and foe is not always clear. They will be tested like never before and will face challenges that will push them to their limits. Join us on this adventure as we explore the farthest reaches of space and uncover the hidden truths that lie within the shadows. Tabletop Journeys presents Star Trek Preservations.
Welcome, travelers. My name is Lee Wanika, and this is Tabletop Journeys. In specific, this is Tabletop Journeys cast interviews for the Star Trek Preservations actual play broadcast. Every Tuesday, we air Star Trek Preservations, and that is an actual play of the Star Trek Adventures role-playing game, 2E, the second edition, the cool edition, the one with the bright colors on the cover. So many good things to talk about with that game. So many great things to talk about with our actual play broadcast, which has just concluded its second season. We have actually, at the time of this recording, recorded the first part of our first episode for season 3. However, we're going to try to limit the spoilers, toss out maybe a teaser, but we're going to talk about all of season 2. We're going to get into kind of what's going on by way of speaking to one of our cast members. So I'm going to stop yapping for a brief moment and turn the mic over to our cast member who is joining us today. Will you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Certainly. I'm David Ridout. I play Lieutenant Ividian Te'nari, the Chief Engineer of the Dalamis Christian. And I think I need to be a little more careful with my little stingers in the beginning because I think Lee Wanika's taking ideas from them to throw at us.
Oh, guaranteed. Guaranteed. You know, some players add threat when they play. Some players never add threat when they play, and they only use momentum. And Dave, you just fill me with ideas all the time. Like, the stinger you're talking about was one from, what, maybe 6 months ago? I'm guessing you're talking about the wave motion gun. And yeah, if
I'm
that's
also
the
thinking
one.
of the joke I made about installing HAL.
Oh, yes. That too. I actually already had an idea for that, but...
And when your name is Dave, you need to be careful about AI jokes.
Yeah, very much so. So Dave and I have known each other for a couple years at this point. Dave came to Tabletop Journeys as a member of our Patreon group, links in the description, and joined us so he could play various games. We started with some D&D. Dave, if I recall correctly, one of the things that I remember talking to you about was the fact that you're largely a forever GM, and this was really a good opportunity for you to roll dice as a player and kind of enjoy some time on that side of the screen. Is that an accurate description?
That's a very accurate description. And I have very thoroughly enjoyed being able to play. I've very much enjoyed particularly playing Tenari.
Yeah, like we've done a couple different games. You've joined us for playtests of Everyday Heroes and a few other things along the way. I've got some great playtests coming up for you in 2025, by the way. And for those listening, if you wish to join the Patreon, please do, because we are going to be expanding our game offerings. But while we will continue our Star Trek series for our Patreons, we also will begin in 2025 to offer some additional games each month, which everybody can join in and have some fun with and test out. So definitely an expanding process. But yeah, I have enjoyed having you as a player. I enjoyed our time when we were doing Candle Keep playing alongside your character. That was some fun as well. And I look forward as we get some other GMs in, opportunities to throw dice with both of us on the same side, because we both have that weird mix of both dry and wet humor, if that makes any sense. And I think that could be a lot of fun. We could get to some serious shenanigans, you and I. Um,
It's like I always say, always intend your puns.
Absolutely. No pun should ever be unintended.
Exactly.
That's accidents do not comedy make. So here we are, both lifelong fans of Star Trek, both lifelong fans of role playing, presented with Star Trek Adventures, which I am on record as saying is the greatest role playing game for the Star Trek IP I have ever played. And this is a person who did not hate any of the ones before, wasn't a big fan of the Decipher system for whatever reason, but didn't hate it. This is the one that really speaks to me the most. What are your thoughts about STA versus some of the other systems that you've played?
The only one I ever really got to play was the FASA system. I had meant to get into some of the other ones, in particular the Last Unicorn,
Yeah.
I believe they had, because I heard some good things about that, but I never got a chance to. But I am really liking Modifius' system, particularly because you can have a lot of fun and the system is not centered around combat. FASA shows its age because despite being Star Trek, it still is kind of centered around the combat. And that's, I think, more of a sign of the times of when it was created as opposed to any fault of the creators.
Yeah.
For the time it was in, it was a good game, but it is ultimately a 1980s game.
Uh,
But it had some very good points in it as well. And in a time when there wasn't really a whole lot of new Star Trek coming out, it fulfilled a niche. Among other things, like the Star Trek tactical game that came out for the ship to ship combat, it came out with the books for like the various Federation, Klingon, and Romulan fleets, which I just devoured because I love ship design.
mm.
And I loved seeing the various ship designs in those books.
I'm a huge fan of ship design.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, on my shelf, I have the FASA Romulan book ones, and actually, that was gifted to me by a player. I'd known this gentleman for years through our game store and through various conventions and such. But he had played Star Trek at one of my convention appearances spring of last year, and this summer he happened past me at another convention, and he's like, "Hey, I got something for you," and he gave me that book, and I like forever grateful because it immediately is like in my head as whenever I see a ship, I look at the crew complement, I look at its
Mm-hmm.
mission profile or however that's detailed in whatever system it's built in, and all of a sudden I now am formulating a story for that
Yeah.
ship. Like, how does that interact with the crew I'm dealing with, or is that a hero ship for a campaign or a one shot
Mm-hmm.
that I've never played before? That's how I look at ship design books. It's no secret or accident that my first physical book in STA was Utopia Planitia,
Yes. Same
and it is
here.
exclusively for exactly that
Mm-hmm.
reason. Ships tell a story. In STA, they're a whole character, and it's a character that's got a deep, deep backstory when you start looking at the evolution of ships and the mission profiles and the talents and all the other good things.
Right. Well, those
And I love them.
FASA books still have two of my absolute favorite designs in Star Trek. The Romulan, I believe it was the Wing Defender Romulan ship. And in the Federation book, the Chandley class frigate, which you might like because the Chandley class frigate has that downswept.
That is
Yep.
my particular design niche. Is I love the downswept nacelle.
Mm-hmm. But those two remain two of my favorite designs, even though they're not canon or anything like that. But, like I said, they fulfilled a niche back in the time there wasn't any new Star Trek coming on because Next Gen wouldn't come out until, the late 80s. And so that was the only way to get anything new on Star Trek. They were about as good a way to get information on Star Trek, like little supplements on Star Trek as you could get. And you had the stats for them also. FASO had a luck stat, so you could see Kirk had something like 101% luck. I
Yeah,
believe it was. If I'm wrong, I'm sure someone will mention it on the internet.
please do. Hit that in the comments. Yeah,
But
I remember that for me, I got really focused in on the novels. Can't remember which one specifically at this particular time we're talking about, but I know I must have reread Yesterday's Sun 15, 20 different times.
yeah,
And then within the first year or so of TNG, I was reading the Kobayashi Maru, one of my all time favorite
I have read
Star
that.
Trek
I
books.
love that one.
And then when they got one of my absolute favorite comic book writers, Peter David, when he did
Hmm.
Imzadi, which to me stands up as the finest Star Trek novel in all of the hundreds and hundreds of novels. Like that is to me the gold standard for novelization. That was the pinnacle for me, you know.
Perhaps my favorite novel is My Enemy, My Ally by Diane Duane. It's an original series novel, and it involves a Romulan commander defecting to the Federation because she thinks her government has gone too far. And it gives you a look into Romulan culture, and it's a fantastic book.
Nice. I don't recall reading that one. I'm gonna have to try to get hold of that and see if I
I
can
also picked up
check it out.
later the Star Trek Vanguard series of novels. That was another original series era,
Nice.
and that was a long series of novels with a interconnected plot line that I quite enjoyed.
Through the 80s and into the early 90s when DC got the
Hmm.
franchise, I collected the DC version. So I had all of those. And then in the 90s, it had flipped over to, I forget the name of the company, but they had a really cool crossover with TNG and DS9, and I remember loving that series. That was awesome. Seeing Cisco in Pulp was incredible, and Riker. Oh, and TOS was part of it. So they had like TOS, DS9, and TNG in this really cool story. It was like 6 issue miniseries. It was fantastic. So my Star Trek itches were filled with comic books and the
Hmm.
novels. TNG was already out when I got into FASA, but played it, loved it. It was a great Star Trek battle simulator. There were times when I played Last Unicorn games that honestly I had toyed around with, never got a chance to try it, with the fact that, hey, if we wanted to do a battle, we'll break out the FASA rules for the battle, but the actual role playing pieces would be done through Last Unicorn games. And that's not a dig on the system. It was just that I really liked the FASA system, even though it was very different than the shows. And to bring us back to STA, that's what I really loved about STA is that this really does all of that really well. Those of us who've been watching Star Trek for a long time and are really into it, while there are really memorable episodes that have really good battles, they generally don't show a lot of the battles. It's a few shots here for dramatic emphasis, and then it's kind of over. Or it's there was a battle and this is the aftermath, or this is the lead up to it. You know, even Discovery, which starts with the Battle of the Binary Stars, had a lot of action involved, but the actual starship battle was pretty minimal in
Yeah.
that initial episode.
Well,
Um,
some of my favorite episodes aren't battle episodes. TNG, The Offspring, DS9 Duet. None of those are battle episodes. Even my favorite original series episode, which is Balance of Terror, which does technically involve a battle, which is the one where they first introduced the Romulans. The battle is not the emphasis of the show.
yeah,
It's the interaction between, Kirk and the Romulan commander, showing the
absolutely.
tension between the two of it.
Yeah, I always go back to the Klingon episode, and I can't think of the name of the episode now, but the one where they were basically using this planet as proxy, and they're arming them, not arming them, and it was,
Yeah.
Kirk versus the Klingons, and they weren't actually fighting because they're not at war, but they were certainly trying to decide who was going to get influence over this planet. And I loved those episodes. The space
Hmm.
stuff, the battle stuff was really cool, but it was never the focus. It was always the highlight. It was always, we failed to do X, so now we're fighting. Or the fight just happened and now we have to deal with it. The battle was always the complicating factor, never the focus of the event. And I loved that concept. And that is to me what Star Trek is. If I'm doing Star Wars, that's not necessarily the case,
Hmm.
right? In that case, I might focus more on the battle. Even when I was running Farscape in 3.5 rules, I would focus on battles a little bit more. When I was running Babylon 5, and I would focus on battles a little bit more because there was a different emphasis there. That doesn't make any of that bad. It just makes it
Hmm.
very different.
Yeah, but the other thing I like about the Modifius system, though, is back in the 80s, I was looking at games in a different eye than I do now. The 80s was a very crunchy time for game design. Certain games you can look at, and Aftermath, I'm looking at you. It was a time where people looked at very heavy rule systems with a lot of crunch to it. These days, I'm looking for, lighter game systems. And STA is very much lighter than the FASA game system, and the Star Trek combat system in the Modifius system is much more abstracted than the tactical combat system they had in the FASA system, which fits the feel for the game better because, like you said, a lot of times the combat is not the center of the episode we want to do. It's meant to highlight something, but oftentimes it's what's leading up to the combat or what's following the combat. That's really the emphasis of the episode.
Absolutely. I am always brought back to, when I'm talking about this element of Star Trek Adventures, a comment that Matt Colville made in reference to Last Unicorn Games when he was working on that project years and years ago. And forgive me, Mr. Colville, if I am misquoting you. My intention is to paraphrase and cover your concept more than anything else, as opposed to parody or anything like that. But essentially, he was working on ramming speed issues and rules for ramming ships or whatever. And he had commented that his mentor and the person working with him on the project said, don't do that. And he says, but it could happen. So what I should do, he says, if you make a rule, then people will do that all the time. So if you're going to do it, you have to make it so it will be so bad for both ships that nobody would ever want to do that. Or if they ever
Mm-hmm.
did it once and their characters survived, they would never do that in a situation again. Or it would simply be the big sacrifice moment at the culmination of a campaign. It wouldn't be the thing you do every other adventure. You have to decide, if that's what you're going to do, how terrible that's going to come out for the person initiating, or don't do it at all. Like, don't make the rule, because if people are going to do it, they're going to do it. So you don't have to make a rule if people want to go do that. But if you're going to do it, make it a certain way. And I always try to keep that in mind with game design in general, with rules. And when you talk about light or heavy or crunchy or not, that's one of the challenges with crunchy systems. They put things in there that people will focus in on because it's the most devastating thing, or
Mm-hmm.
it is the optimum way to do a thing. The crunchier you are, the more likely there is to be an optimum method. STA in general avoids a lot of that because of the way the system works. And they certainly improved even upon that with second edition, with the removal of the challenge dice,
Mm-hmm.
with the slight alteration, and in some cases, removal of a talent or two that became the optimum choices by just the shifts in talents from the various species talents to species traits.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are still talents that are unique to species, but the shifts they made, I think, really did limit. There's an optimum path to build a character. There are two or three different ways to build the best helmsman, probably 15 or 20 or 1500 for all I know. But I have looked and pored over this book for the better part of 10 months now, and I've yet to find any role that has a singular best way to do it. And I think that's an impressive feat.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking about character, let's talk about your character.
Okay.
Let's talk about Tenari. Season one, we had a lot of interesting things. We found out that Tenari is a bit of a conspiracy theorist, and
And I
I
will
found that to
say,
be very interesting.
when I designed Tenari, that was not part of my original plan for him. That kind of popped up in episode one, and people kind of mentioned that about him as the game went on. And I was, you know, kind of surprised with that, but I figured, it's stuck. It sounds like fun. Let's run with it.
Yep.
It's one of these things in role playing that kind of pops up spontaneously in the game, and you kind of think about it, and you're like, yeah, that works. You
Absolutely.
know, keep your mind open, see sometimes what happens in the game, and sometimes Glenn sticks you with something that works.
Yeah. I love the concept of creation and play, right? I
Mm-hmm.
love the idea of leave some openings, get it later. Like when we did our session zero and we were doing our character building, and very specifically with the crew that does expeditions, I told everybody if they didn't have an idea, and I believe when we switched over to second edition, I said that's with Glenn. He's like, I really don't have an idea for that. I said, then don't fill it in. Creation and play. If it comes up in game, then you fill it in. I'm fine with
It
that.
it's
And
typical for me to kind of sketch out my character and have a rough idea what's going on and then see how they develop during play. Because I don't want to like have something set in concrete and have it not work in a game. I want to see how things work with the other players, see what their characters are like, see what the world is like, and have something evolve. And the fact that Tenari wound up being a conspiracy theorist is a perfect example of that.
yeah, I love that. We had a lot of fun. We talked at the end of season one about your desire to have Tenari spend some time with one of our favorite NPCs, Damon Brazig, who I had immeasurable amounts of fun developing and playing. And that was an NPC that was 100% developed in play. There was no character sheet until probably a season two episode for that character. I mean, I use stats off a generic Damon or whatever from the core rules the few times I had to roll things, but he rarely actually had to roll. He was generally speaking just the NPC who was just part of the scene. He was the guest star. He wasn't the person doing the doing, so to speak. He was the person that things were happening and he created some interesting complications for everybody. But I love that character. And when you had said in our interview last year that you wanted to get some more time to kind of develop the friendship between the two characters, I was like, I
Mm-hmm.
cannot wait until we get to do that. If I have a sadness about season two, is that it was towards the end of season two when I finally got to get that episode rolled out. I really wanted to initially do that earlier. It just, we got into things in the game again, campaigns develop and play, right? So I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
there's some heavy things going on in the middle part of the season, and Brazic, as fun as he is to play, he's not the right NPC character for that kind of story. So I had to wait till the right beats and moments, and I really loved the episode that we got to put
Yeah.
together for that.
And the listeners will note that there's a theory going around that one of the reasons that we got hauled into the trial that we did is because they were actually looking for the large amount of contraband alcohol that Tenari has gotten from Brazig.
Yeah, and that could be a factor, yes. So, listeners should know that one of the things we like to do here at Tabletop Journeys is at the end of every season is interview each cast member, kind of get their feeling and flavor for the season and get an idea of what they're looking for in the next season. That helps me as a GM inform how we build the season to follow because we know the types of things that players are looking for so we can build a game that really works for them. It's a great technique, something I recommend that GMs, whether you're playing ST or any other game, if you're doing a long-term campaign, you do every so often touch base with your players and say, hey, let's talk about where things are, where you're going. What are some of the things you're looking forward to? Is there some part of your character or your story that you haven't touched yet that you want to see? And that way I can take notes and work that into future episodes. Along those lines, I think we hit most of the things we talked about for season two. What are your thoughts about season two? Was there anything that you were hoping to get into or do a little bit more with that you didn't really get a chance to?
Well, I very much enjoyed season two, and I really enjoy the fact that you and Josh are willing to put up with things that the players do that sometimes throw things off kilter, whether it's kidnapping people off planets or people yelling about telepathic rights, and that you guys kind of roll with the punches on that. Game masters have to be able to improvise on the spot when players do things unexpected. It's half the fun of being a game master.
It is all the fun of being a game master.
Mhm.
When I'm asked what are some of the most fun things that happen at a game table, and I do get asked that fairly frequently, for me, the answer is always when somebody sends something downrange that I never expected. I personally wasn't running the episode where there was a kidnapping. That was Josh. And I will never be able to properly express the amount of humor that erupted from my soul when I looked at my phone and Josh says, "Hey, They just kidnapped one of the citizens and left the system. What the heck do I do? I was in stitches. I was wonderful. And Josh handled that brilliantly. You guys did such an amazing job. There was some extra planning that had to go in the subsequent episodes to figure out how to make that work, provide legitimate consequences, and provide meaningful story to follow. It was absolutely nothing that we had anticipated. It took us in very different directions. And so I invite the audience to really listen to those episodes. I think that was episodes 4, 5, and 6, or was it 5, 6, and 7? It was a 3 episode arc effectively, but absolutely, those are some interesting episodes. They challenged our technique for certain. And as far as the rights issue in that trial, whew, I honestly didn't expect that. I had a list of things that I said, okay, they'll probably do this, they'll probably do that. Nowhere near it. Like, I was expecting Drumhead or Court Martial from TOS, and you immediately brought that to Measure of a Man and Ad Aspera from season 2 of Strange New Worlds. And those are two of my absolute favorite Star Trek episodes, right? So, and in specific, the Strange New Worlds episode, one of my all-time favorites. Like, literally came on the list when I watched it and knocked people off the list. So good. And you brought that right there, and I was like in that moment.
Well, when we were doing the
That was fun.
session, I thought of it at one point when Glenn was talking. He made some comment about being able to tell when he was being read or not. And it clicked with me as like, Najar can tell, none of the rest of us can. And then while he and then Ocean were going, I was thinking about it. It's like, okay, should I do this or should I not? And I thought, well, let's go for it. Because I've been playing Tenari specifically to be the guy who pushes the button. That's why I took bold engineering. That's why I took a high daring. And he's a conspiracy theorist. And since I took the conspiracy theorist, in a way, for those of you who watched the show, there's a show out that was on many years ago on USA called White Collar. There's a character on the show called Mozzie. And so, to a certain extent, I've been basing Tenari around him a bit because he was a conspiracy theorist on that show. And I could just see Mozzie making a play like that in a trial.
Absolutely.
And I thought it would also make for a fun thing for the listeners. And I also thought it was a unique opportunity in that I could grab the scene without taking anything away from any of the other players. I could also derail a scene without derailing an entire adventure. So I was like, when am I going to get a chance to do this again? Well, we'll find out in season 3, but
Yeah, who knows? We'll see.
and it worked out pretty well.
Yeah, I was very pleased with the way that worked. It provided some very fun moments that I will forever remember.
As far as what I'm looking for in season 3, I'd kind of like to get off the ship a little more. We've done a lot of stuff on the ship. I'd like to get some more away missions.
Originally, we had one planned. Some of the changes we had to make earlier in the season took away a couple of our episodes later in the season, so we had to do things a little differently. That's actually why we ended up doing your Brazic stuff via your.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. I also enjoyed that because I got to use skills that I don't typically get to use. My command skills are not the most developed, and that was kind of fun to get to use those. Even if I did possibly unwittingly unleash employment agency onto the 23rd century.
Yeah, there might be some fallout on that. But at the end of the day, you did bring home the big hat. So, there's always that. When your character leaves a scene with the big hat and you can throw some Packlids at your adventure, then you know that Jim Johnson's very happy and the rest of us giggle a lot. Like little kids with the extra cookies and strawberry milk. That's kind of how that episode felt to me when we were wrapping that one up. So, getting off the ship a little bit more, it sounds like a great idea. I think we can certainly work that into the system for you. But part of the process of getting off the ship more means other people have to step up and take positions on the ship, which is a great transition into one of the Star Trek mechanics and roleplay technique topics that I wanted to discuss with you today. And that is the use of supporting characters and how one interacts with supporting characters, or even on to a lesser extent, NPCs on a given crew. So, for those who have not played a lot of Star Trek Adventures or are just recently coming to the game, one of the coolest factors of Star Trek Adventures is, unlike a typical D&D game where the goal is never separate the party, Star Trek Adventures really clamors for you to separate the party all the time, because it doesn't make sense for every specific officer or every specific department to be a part of every single mission, or at least in every single scene. But it's a role playing game. If you and five of your good friends are sitting around the table playing, one of them wants to play the doctor, one of them wants to play the con role, one of them wants to play security, and you're going to a science conference, and the scientist may need security there, or it may be a science conference that has some engineering capacity. So the engineer would go, what does everybody else do? Well, the answer is they play secondary characters. So I did kind of want to talk about your secondary character for Star Trek Preservations and how they developed, and how and when you've chosen to select that character or choose a way of handling things where that character's come up, and kind of get your thoughts on it so that you can share with the audience that player's perspective on supporting characters.
Yeah, I love the supporting character concept. I mean, the idea that not the entire main crew would go everywhere, having a supporting character to bring along. And even if you just want to play something a little different. At session zero, when you guys pitched the game to us, you told us to create our main character and then create a secondary character. And my main character I had already decided on. I wanted the Andorian engineer. I started thinking about my secondary character, and I was thinking about what character I wanted to play. I had three species in mind that I wanted, and it was either going to be Andorian, joined Trill, or Bajoran. And our captain was going to be a joined Trill, so okay, let him have that. And I had decided on Andorian for my main character, so okay, Bajoran. I love Bajorans because I love Deep Space Nine. I think they did such a great job fleshing out the Bajoran people and the Bajoran culture. And I was thinking about what department to put him in. I was like, well, chances are if we're going somewhere and my engineer's not going to go, you're always going to need a security character. So let's make them security. Think this out what they're going to need when, my main character isn't going to go. So Bajoran security officer, which considering the Bajoran history makes sense. Also, since my main character was male, I decided to make my secondary character female. So along came Lieutenant Alana Kem. I originally thought she was going to wind up being an ensign, but she got promoted along the way to become second in charge of the security squad. So hey. And then I finally got a chance to play her when we went down to rescue Ocean's daughter. My character was not going to be going down, so I popped up and said, hey, do you guys mind if I pull out my secondary character for this? We did, had a load of fun, and up came the question when I asked Commander Chazilra, do you need me to act as a Starfleet officer or a Bajoran resistance fighter? And there's actually a background reason behind that. And this is reflected, just so also the players know, we've been told for some of the secondary characters who have actually had some speaking parts to add a value and a talent to them since they become a little more developed. So the background she has is she was born and grew up off of Bajor on a Cardassian agricultural colony. And she actually never set foot on Bajor until after the occupation was over. Her parents died when she was young, like so many Bajorans did, and she spent her time in the Resistance off-world the entire time. It's like that line from Rogue One that Cassian Andor says, I've been in the rebellion since I was 9 years old. She's that kind of character. And so the Resistance ends. She finally gets on Bajor. When she's old enough, she joins the Bajoran militia. And she's in the Bajoran militia during the Dominion War, where the Bajoran militia doesn't see a lot of action, but Dominion War ends, and she's not feeling real fulfilled just sitting around checking people's IDs, doing customs at Deep Space Nine or whatnot. And she gets some advice from Colonel Kira that maybe she should join Starfleet, which she does. They probably have like an accelerated program through Starfleet Academy for people who join from off-world militias. And probably, they go through an intensive counseling session, which for some reason she has no idea why they call the Row protocols. But, she makes an oath that following the emissary's example, she's going to follow the Starfleet rules. But she meets a bunch of Dominion War veterans who talk about on the front lines they could have used someone with the skills of a Bajoran resistance fighter. And she gets confused. What is it that I should be doing? She thinks, the emissary was originally telling her that she should be following Starfleet rules, but she's got these veterans saying they could have used, resistance fighter tactics. And she thinks about it for a while, and she has a flash of inspiration that the emissary was more than just an emissary. He was also a Starfleet officer. And so she says until her own judgment becomes good enough, she will go to her commanding officer, which in the DC is Lieutenant Najjar, and tell him what she said and that she's made a promise that she will follow Starfleet morals and their code of conduct. But if he ever feels they need the tactics of a Bajoran resistance officer, tell her. Otherwise, she will always act according to Starfleet morals because she sees these Starfleet officers as an extension of the emissary.
I love that backstory. And while you and I have talked in brief terms about most of that, this is our first conversation where we've gotten into all of the details.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of going to go through my process as a GM and navigating the use of supporting characters with Alana Kem as an example. So when Dave mentioned during our session 0, we had said everybody needs to make a secondary character. That was because the supporting character piece was one of the highlights of the game system when I first read it. Before I'd even played it, before the first D20 hit the table, that spoke to me because it was a big problem in last Unicorn games. I struggled with the games I ran and the games I played in, figuring out how to get certain people in certain situations or certain players because there was no mechanic for that. And basically, we strong armed people into situations that there's no real reason why anybody would do that. So knowing that, I'm like, okay, it was actually one of the core reasons why I went with the Saber, beyond the fact it's my absolute favorite ship, but also the crew size is perfect for a role playing game. There are a lot of people there, like a Starfleet ship should have, to back you up and to fill in gaps and to take care of things, but not so many as to be impossibly redundant. With a crew of 40, you have backup, but at a certain point, attrition will cause problems. There are only so many engineers on the ship. There are only so many people capable of flying the ship. There are only so many people able to do different things, and I think that's really important to note. So I love that crew size as an element, but because that crew size is so small, that also means everybody should know who their backup is. You know, Ensign Gomez would be a known quantity on a ship like this. Whereas on the Galaxy class, which has over 1,100 or 1,200 people, there are probably 15 or 20 people who at any given point in time may be able to come in and take over Ensign Gomez's spot. So it is important as a game master for me to keep it in my head and keep that narrative flair going to have a smaller ship size. So I prefer to run ships like the Saber, the Nova, the Oberth, or things of that, real smaller ships for exactly that reason. So when we had all these characters came up, I love the idea of a security officer because, like you said, you're almost always going to need a security officer. For me, the few games I've played as a player, depending on what I do, if somebody else is playing security, I will go with a con officer because if there's an away mission, you could always use a pilot.
I mean,
And
a medical officer is a good one also because you always need a medic on the field.
Exactly. You know, Marty, his supporting character on the Expeditions game, is a medic. Happens to be a
Mhm.
Klingon, which is very good. I believe he is quoted as saying, "Today is not a good day to die." But, so there's that.
Man, I can see that. Klingon fighting against the specter of death. That's beautiful.
Oh, yeah. Fantastic. So fun. And Marty and I actually trade because there have been a couple missions where Marty's needed to play a supporting character. So he's done it, and I've kind of taken that lead, and then I've played it a few times. So we kind of share that character a little bit, and it's a lot of fun. But, I also will play a lot of con officers for exactly that same kind of reason. So when you were developing the character and you put it together, we had mentioned the briefest a bit of the Bajoran history. I'm like, fine with it, love
Mm.
Bajorans. I don't think I've been terribly shy about the fact that Ensign Rowe uh, is one of my favorite TNG characters. For perspective, if anybody has seen Michael Desmuke of Continuing Conversations and Continuing Missions and so many different Star Trek projects, including Captain's Log as the lead writer, the way he glows on Seven, I feel that way about Rowe. One of the highlights of Picard season 3 for me. So when I look at a character like that, I love Bajorans. I love the way they developed in DS9, my favorite series of Star Trek, and really dug where you were going. What I really was impressed by is when we had to go to Saltec 4 and we were picking the folks for the away mission. I originally had you going on that mission, and
Hmm.
Dave, you sold yourself short because it wasn't that the decision was Alana would go. Dave said, "Hey, it really doesn't make sense that I would go on this. It makes more sense to take another security officer. How about Tenari stays on the ship and Alana Kem goes?" And I said, "You know what, Dave? You're right." And then we rolled with that.
Hmm.
So the advice that I give to players is even if your DM didn't say, "Hey, everybody make a secondary character," have some secondary character concepts in mind. Heck, just make them. It's fun to make characters. I go on BC Homes Tool all the time and just make random characters, and eventually I'll populate them in a ship somewhere or scene somewhere. Kind of have that in your head so that when the scenario comes up, you've got a character who's kind of ready to go. Narratively, because through season 1 and season 2, we did not use the actual 1E rules for advancement very well or at all. I did some narrative choices. 2 seasons in, if supporting characters or recurring NPC characters had multiple speaking roles, they got the benefit of a value or they got the benefit of a talent and a value. But it would have to be something that was kind of used within. So that's kind of where that came from. It was very narrative. It was not necessarily by the rules. There are very good rules in 2E for just that. And they're very close to what we did. It's based on the amount of speaking time and things like that. And there's some reputation rules and some other things that will add into that. But I'm very pleased with how balanced our non-player character and supporting player character roles have advanced throughout 2 seasons of the show.
And one thing I kind of noticed listening to Continuing Conversations, some of their games they've done, is they kind of treat their supporting characters as a pool of supporting characters.
Mm-hmm.
So, if, for example, in let's say our group, even if I'm going on a mission, let's say Lacey can pull and play Alana if she wanted to.
I absolutely like that, but I also like developing the ship,
Mhm.
which speaks to a question in the Facebook group that actually came up today, where somebody was talking about how do I make the ship a home? How do I make players who have not been huge Star Trek fans really feel for the ship and really get into that? And I had some thoughts about that. I'm actually developing a script for the vlog about that very topic. But one of the things that I think really helps is the connection to other characters on the ship. So everybody having their own separate and nearly exclusive supporting character, but not necessarily exclusive, helps. Having recurring NPCs that people feel comfortable going back to, like Tobor with Tobor supporting character Dr. New. These are, I think those are ways people can really bridge that gap and care about the ship, make the ship their home, all those Hallmark card kind of statements really come to fruition. But I think that supporting characters is a really strong
Mhm.
way to bridge that gap. That way,
And
your
the other
player
advantage
characters
of
have something
having a
else to live
small
for.
ship is we have every member of our crew named, and almost everyone has a picture.
Yes. I actually take some time and go to the BC Homes tool and knock out a picture for one of our crew members that we haven't seen. As long as they've been talked about, I tend not to do it until they've had at least one speaking appearance. Because in that speaking appearance, I now have that thought in my head about who they are, what they look like, which is why you almost never see a picture for one of our crew members until after they've had a speaking role.
Yeah, but we have a shared document with the entire crew named of the Delamas Christian, so we can refer to it as we need to, and what their rank is and what their particular duty station is, so that in the game we can look up and we can actually call the crew member by their name, and it helps kind of bring that duty station alive.
Absolutely. And because I'm a bit of a junkie for note taking and information, it became a great place for me to put in talents and focuses for these characters. So if you have a mission like, hey, we need a pilot who's good at this thing, or we need a scientist who covers this thing, well, as those things come up, and almost all of these characters are creation and play, do we have somebody in the science department who covers botany or whatever? Okay, let's go look. And then we can turn to the page, and I'm actually going to do that on air while we're doing it. And I may have picked one that our lead character knows, but we'll see. All right, so if we go to botany, actually, I just picked something that nobody on the ship has, but there is an NPC who has two foci that have not been selected yet. So we're in a situation we need somebody who has botany. I would probably just fill in that spot. Unless I was sitting on a whole bunch of threat, I would probably spend some threat to say, nope, that is not going to be the focus they have. You have nobody who has botany suffer, right? But generally speaking, we can just put in that character. They have the character's name. They know things about the character. In this particular situation, that is Lieutenant JG Dory. She is an NPC who's an Orion, xenobiology, anthropology, archaeology. We're just going to make that canon right here, right now on air. She has botany. And at this point, she has had a few major speaking roles,
Mm-hmm.
but she had not prior to the last couple of episodes. So she currently has no specific talents or values, but as we roll into season 3, that will actually be filled out. So that's kind of how we've really done the season, building out the ships and making everybody kind of fit and feel good about where they are and know the ship, know the people they're working with, know the people they're fighting for. Lacey, when she had her quick track, she knew exactly who she was talking to and talking about. It makes for great role playing. It's a lot easier for those of us on a podcast because we can be very specific, very descriptive, which you need to be in a podcast. Probably less so if you're playing an in person game, but it's a lot of fun. It's very narratively gratifying. But with that, I've taken up a ton of time from you
Mm-hmm.
tonight, Dave. I really appreciate that you were one of the first folks to send me your completed character sheets, reset up for full 2E rules. You've also done that with Alana Kem. Thank you very much for
Mm-hmm.
that. I was looking at those, looking forward to that.
Not
One of the things
only do I have my portrait for my character, I gave you a mirror universe portrait for my character.
Haha, yes. Very excited. One of
We're
the things that I'm going to be doing, with your approval, if you don't mind, is I was going to add to both the Star Trek Adventure site, and if Michael would like to add it to continuing missions, start doing some crew profiles of the various characters from the ship, kind of in conjunction with our interviews.
sounds
And
fine to me.
I think it'd be a lot of fun to see kind of how we do it over here at Tabletop Journeys and the Delamas Christian. So I'm kind of looking forward to getting those things out there. As we wrap up, is there anything that you wanted to kind of wrap up with, whether it be about Tenari, whether it be about Chem, whether it be about STA, gaming in general?
Well, I would say in general, a little piece of advice for new players and players in general. And this kind of goes along with Tenari, but don't be afraid of threat. I mean, it's got kind of that sinister sounding name of threat, but when you look at what game masters spend threat on, in any other game, it's what game masters would do anyway in terms of, plot twists or whatever they would throw at you. STA just kind of, I don't know if monetizing it is quite the right term, but it gives little rules
Mechanized
in
it.
there for it. Mechanizes it, yeah. And in general, this is not the kind of game where a game master is out to get you. Your game master is there to provide you with something fun. And so that's what threat is there for. So don't be afraid of threat.
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly support that statement. When I'm running at conventions and people are very new at the system, you can see their fear of threat kind of being in there. So I appreciate that advice for folks. I've often said exactly what you just said. And I heard it on a podcast once where someone said, well, why would I need this? I can do this as a game master anytime. You absolutely can. But here's
Mm-hmm.
why I love the threat and momentum mechanism, specifically threat as a GM, because if I'm not playing for my friends or the collective group that we built together here through the podcast, through the actual play, and if I'm playing at a random convention where I'm with people I've never played with before, which is actually becoming harder and harder. I keep getting return players, which is awesome. But I'm actually building like regular groups at conventions, which is so rewarding. But if I'm playing at a convention with folks I've never played with before, it is important for them to feel I'm being fair and without
Mm-hmm.
me having to spend 20 minutes of the 3 hour or 4 hour block doing a session zero to get them to trust me. I need to do that session zero in about 5 minutes in a convention. And I need them to be able to trust me in order for them to have the most
Yep.
rewarding and fun time. So, because there's a meta currency there to do the things that I would absolutely have done anyway,
Mm-hmm.
I now am automatically trusted when I choose to spend that currency because they know where it came from and they
Yep.
know why.
And Michael and
And I would,
Jim, if you are listening to this, Lee Winika and I would probably be more than happy to come on continuing conversations to talk about don't be afraid of threat.
yeah, threat is awesome. And I say that the few times I've been a player. I don't necessarily always choose bold, but I will almost always take something that will generate threat because using that always primes the pump of the adventure to make
Never
the adventure
regretted
more
choosing
interesting.
bold engineering.
Always fun. Always
Mm-hmm.
fun. And we happen to be a ship that's got a bold engineer and a bold scientist, and it's incredible.
I believe Najar has bold security.
Yes, we have a lot of bold on our crew, which fits the mission profile and the Delamas Christian very, very well.
And add to that the Andorian species trait and the way I roll dice, and our captain does not sleep well at night.
Oh no, we give him fits. I can hear him from California. Oh my god, oh Tenari's on air right now. What's he doing to me? So, with that, everyone, I want to thank you all for joining Dave and myself, Commodore Pritchard, and Lieutenant Tenari of the Delamas Christian. We thank you so very much for joining us on this very fun and adventurous ride, and we look forward to season 3 because we have so many more things to do. There's a galaxy out there, folks, and the Federation's got some trouble on the horizon, so we need to preserve it. Have a wonderful night, everybody. IDIC, y'all.